Hello, everyone, and welcome to our 2024 Data Engineering Roundtable. We have just launched our latest trend report on data engineering, enriching data pipelines, expanding AI, and expediting analytics, sponsored by Dagster and Kibo. I'm Jesse Davis, Chief Technologist here at DZone. It's my privilege to introduce you to a panel of experts who will be joining our discussion today. First up, Joel, Senior Software Engineer at Fuse.io. Welcome. Srinath, Lead Data Engineer at CVS Health. We have Fred back with us, Technology Evangelist at AI for Human Nexus. Welcome back. Tuhin, Dr. Tuhin, as I like to call him, Professor of AI and Blockchain at the Jagdeep Sheth School of Management. Barry, Founder of Data Strategy at Tectalin. Pedram, Head of Data Engineering and DevRel over at Dagster Labs. And Berzan, Founder and CEO of Kibo and Professor of Computer Science at the University of Michigan. Welcome, everybody. We are feeling a little nostalgic about this one. It's over 10 years ago. It's been a long, long time, over a decade. DZone welcomed its very first ever data-centric publication. Things have changed since then, right? The trends surrounding data have just gone through so many different phases. We've got big data, we've got data science, advanced analytics, BI and analytics, just so many different terms to throw around. But despite the different words and vernacular, the purpose has remained the same. Our job is to build intelligent, data-driven systems. The industry has come a long way in those 10 years. So this year's trend report, focusing on enriching data pipelines, expanding AI, and expediting analytics, unifies all this former terminology, all the advancements and discoveries into one big picture, illustrating where we stand today on this evolving data journey. So within the pages of the report, you're going to find the keys to successfully building a great solid foundation for fast data intelligence across your organization, leveraging everything from seamless data ingestion, processing, integration techniques over to vector data, large language models, data governance, seamless data integration, processing techniques, vector data, large language models, data governance, and observability. Our goal is for our conversation today to help guide individual contributors like yourselves as they strive for mastery of these environments. So we're going to dig into the report now. And to start us off, we want to talk a little bit about how organizations are storing their data, as well as how often developers have to think about data residency while they're building software. So we asked our audience where they currently store their data or databases. Large organizations were more likely to report that they store data only in the cloud, and the response rates are very positively correlated with the organization size. So mid-sized organizations are most likely using hybrid solutions, and then smaller organizations use private or on-premise. It's kind of unsurprising, maybe, you tell me. Resources and company size often correlate with the amount of data managed and money, right? So hybrid is up 7%, while in the cloud and on-premise decreased. So we've seen a shift going to hybrid models. So I'd like to know, the question to the panel, are there increased benefits in recent years for adopting a hybrid approach rather than cloud or on-premise only when it comes to data residency and storage? Or is it really just a matter of resources, right? Does it really still correlate to the size of the company? And Pedram, if you'd like, won't you start us off?
Yeah, for sure. It is actually a little bit surprising to me because at Dexter, I think we deal with a lot of companies who tend to be a lot smaller and are almost exclusively on cloud. And so it's probably both a function of company size, but also your sector, if I had to guess.
Okay.
Uh, and so, I mean, hybrid models, what we've seen is generally the bigger you are, the more likely you go to hybrid. And that also varies by geography too, right? So a lot of European companies often need to have a hybrid or on-prem solution because they don't want data to leave the EU, for example. And so we can work closely with them on that. But yeah, I think hybrid is probably more complex than most people need or want. But sometimes you have to have a hybrid model, whether it comes to regulation or just security issues.
Awesome. Well, I'm super curious from a developer perspective, like a senior developer, Joel. you're in the trenches dealing with this stuff. Is there anything that you see down at that level that would indicate this makes sense?
Well, I think that hybrid storage is often just a reality that you're facing for a lot of companies, and I think Pedram's point resonates with me because companies that are small, sometimes that correlates with early in their journey. Perhaps a startup that's just getting started.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, like the elastic cloud resources is really beneficial there. But companies that have been around longer, they might just hybrid might be the reality, and they need to cope with it. I think from the developer's perspective, kind of dealing with inconsistent and sometimes incompatible APIs for data presents a pretty significant challenge. And there's been a lot of standardization around the S3 API over time has now become really a gold standard. I in the inverse, I'm kind of excited about perhaps this becoming more broadly adopted, but offering approaches for hybrid storage in the sense of actually accelerating workloads. So you're in the cloud, but maybe you have access to different kinds of hardware at the lower level to accelerate AI workloads or data engineering workloads.
Okay. Any other perspectives?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead.
very important perspective is about the data sensitivity. So, if the data is too personal and it is very sensitive to the organization, for the customer, or even from the regulatory perspective, it makes absolute sense to have it in the private cloud and the remaining part of the data in the public cloud. And that happens for most of the organizations. So, that's one of the strong reasons that organizations in today's era should have a kind of hybrid approach.
Okay. Very cool. Berzon, do you have a perspective? Like it's very unique, the whole CEO thing and professor. Like we've got you kind of cross those boundaries. So do you see the same thing?
I think I'm going to give you a black and white answer, actually. I actually don't think there's any advantage to having a hybrid environment. You see a lot of it in the industry, but at least from my exposure to hundreds of these customers who are customers of data clouds, the likes of Snowflake and whatnot, whenever we see a hybrid deployment, it's not by choice. As Pedram correctly pointed out, it's usually it's something that's because of compliance requirements. There was an M&A acquisition. There was an M&A activity. You acquired a bunch of business units. They're running their own on-prem thing. It's a workaround. You see it a lot, but I don't think it's ever by choice. Like, I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning and says, I wish I had a hybrid environment where I could just go through the pain of quitting my data in my Snowflake and also deal with this legacy system. So I think it's common, but I don't think it's by choice. I think eventually it will go away as companies mature, as the technology matures, as the data teams basically have time to do these migrations. The world is moving towards the cloud. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, that's so great question. Pop quiz team. How many of you would prefer if only you could store stuff and deal with the cloud? Anybody? Only the cloud? Yeah, there we go. All right. Anybody prefer hybrid or on premise? Okay, Fred does. Okay. Would you like to tell us why? That was interesting. I was not expecting that.
The thing is that at some point, well, I'm working mainly around AI, and at some point, you have to, when you are on edge, you are not really, on the cloud by definition. So it's a kind of hybrid. You need some in between the cloud and being on premise. So yeah, you have to some point.
Okay. Well, there you go. A preferential treatment toward hybrid on premise. I was not expecting that. Cool. Thanks, Fred. Thanks for sharing. But yeah, I mean, for me personally, the training a large language model sometimes is easier if I've got a giant machine, but fascinating. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about, y'all know, data warehousing, data lake house, whatever, different terms here. But we had this thing says data storage and residency, right? They're essential to overall data pipelines. You have to have that stuff set up right. More than half of our respondents, 61%, said that their organization stores data in a data warehouse. Almost half, 45%, said their organization keeps data in data lakes. Additionally, respondents claiming that their organization utilizes data lake houses. However, while still in the minority, 25% did increase from the results of our last year's data pipeline survey, saying that data lakehouse usage is on the rise. So as we've seen with newer technologies before, right? Large organizations usually play around with stuff and move and lead the charge in adoption. And so we're thinking that those organizations will increase their usage of data lakehouses over data warehouses and data lakes in the coming years. But, want to talk about this a little bit. So like, what are you using, right? Which data type of storage solutions are you adopting? And where does it, where does it fit? And what shortcomings do you see with these? Anybody? All right, Tuhan, go ahead.
Well, again, I'm coming from a kind of AI background, and we work with different types of raw data. Can be image, can be speech, can be natural language, even can be numbers and all other qualitative stuff. So for us, data lake is something we always prefer to keep our data. And as far as the requirement goes, we pull the data, fetch the data, and do our analysis. So it's of course the kind of heading towards data lake house because we pull it and do the analysis. But if you ask me where do you store it first, data lake is the first thing we store the raw data. Yeah.
Okay. So raw data in the data lake first. Got it. All right. Anyone else?
Yeah, I go.
All right, go ahead, Fred, and then Srinath.
Yeah, I think a good approach integrates both data lake and data lakehouse. In fact, data lakes get flexibility for unstructured data, which is perfect for handling a variety of wide variety of sources. But on top of that, the data lakes add structure, which is really necessary when it comes to analytics and AI application. So regarding that, I think the main challenge is a consistency across the systems, and also to get sure that to have the right flexibility to run the application.
Okay. All right, Srinath, go ahead.
Yeah. So in my area, so in the specific to applications that we use, in our organization, we use both data warehouse and data lakehouse. As a specific application that we have, we wanted to use lakehouses because we wanted to bring the external data that comes in different formats. So we wanted to load that and train the AI and ML models. So in that scenarios, we use the data lakehouses.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, anyone else? All right, go ahead, Joel, and then I'll switch to another question.
Yeah, I think that one of the big challenges with data lakes and data lake houses is making sure that they don't devolve into what's known as the data swamp. But a lot of these table formats, especially the main choices that teams have now are Apache Iceberg. There's Delta Lake, Hudi. They really do offer a much more principled approach to managing this, and I also think that it does require us to rethink almost how we talk about these systems, because an organization has a data warehouse, or maybe they use multiple data warehouses. That's a reality in a lot of situations, but it's almost hard to say that you have a lake house, because fundamentally when you're building this data lake, let's say you have Iceberg tables, you now unlock many composable components that can operate with that. And so you have you can query it with DuckDB, Spark, Trino. You have all sorts of there's no like one or multiple lake houses at that point. You kind of just have like your these organizational building blocks to build your own system as needed. So I think there's a really useful rethinking there.
Awesome. Good stuff. Well, I want to move. So now we're talking about where we're storing data residency, that type of stuff. Now I want to talk about ETL or even ELT, right? Depending on how you want to do that, how that's been adopted, right? And almost everyone, this is 96% of our respondents to the survey, selected at least one of the listed ETL approaches. And more than half, right, 59% selected 3 or more, right? It was manual database, imports, exports, CSV, text, etc. was the most popular, right? No surprise there. Followed by reusable but manually run SQL scripts and specialized ETL tool. Right. So showing little year-over-year change, it's about the same. These results suggest that small organizations are generally more likely to lack the need or the resources to utilize more sophisticated automated ETL approaches, and tend to be able to, or even forced to use manual approaches more often than not. It's one hypothesis. On the other side, large organizations are more likely to use a wide variety of ETL approaches depending on the circumstances, as those from large organizations were significantly more likely to use, quote, the specialized ETL tools and specialized data pipelining tools. as opposed to the smaller companies using the manual database imports and exports, right? So this is a really important question to me, especially for anybody, if anyone here is at a smaller organization. Is company size indicative of data complexity? That's an interesting question. Is company size indicative of data complexity? Why or why not? Who wants to jump in first?
I can take it. Karen.
All right, Barzan, why don't you start, and then Tuhin, you go next.
I think what we're seeing, it used to, it absolutely used to, but not anymore. I think what data clouds like the likes of Snowflake and others have done is that they've really lowered that adoption barrier, right? Like back in the day, you'd have to go and, you know, get a license, software license, buy the hardware, hire DBAs and whatnot. Now within a matter of minutes, you can actually get up and running, you know, get things up and running on Snowflake or BigQuery or Redshift. And I think what they've done is that by lowering that adoption barrier, now you've got more users and applications who can tap into data. You have more data, more users and applications, many of which are not as data savvy, are tapping into data, which is a good thing. But what that means is that data pipelines are getting way more complex these days, right? And as a result, they're a lot harder to optimize manually, but also the cost of cloud infrastructure is going through the roof. So we're actually, one of the interesting things we're observing at Kibo, we're helping a lot of cloud data warehouse customers reduce their costs using our AI-based solution. And what we're seeing is that the complexity of the data pipelines, even their spend, does not necessarily correlate with the company size for that same reason, because they've turned that adoption barrier into a OpEx kind of barrier. So could be a company of like 20 people spending $20 million a year, or a company of a Fortune 50 company just spending $100,000 a year.
Got it. So more, yeah, interesting, cool. Tuhin.
Yeah, I completely in sync with what Mr. Barzan just mentioned. Yeah. Company size is not a kind of indicator, has got correlation, I would say, with the complexity of data. Rather, we have seen of late that the very small organizations work with diverse set of data, and as Mr. Barzan mentioned, they make millions of dollars. Now, assuming that the scenario is not that great for all the companies, small companies, they might not have that much of millions of dollars. But then currently we have got all the low-code tools, no-code ETL tools as well. So that would kind of significantly reduce the cost. So technology has improved in such a manner with all the automation tools and the analytics tool or AI tool within the ETL itself, that the transformation can be done in an automated way. So that way, even the small companies, even if they have got diverse kinds of data, but with a very minimal amount of resources, they can accomplish the project.
Very cool. All right, so Barry, I have a question for you. As our resident expert, by the way, for those of you who have not had an opportunity to read the article "Optimizing Your Data Pipeline," it's fascinating around this topic of ETL, ELT. But as a quick tip to those out there, what are some things to look for as we're diving into data complexity and understanding the correct order for those terms?
Okay, that's a really great question. Some of the things that you should consider when you want to decide on if to use ETL or ELT would be storage. With ELT, obviously, you're going to store the data in like the cloud first before you do like the transformations. With ETL, you're literally just loading it and then you're doing the transformations before you load it into like a data warehouse. So like the storage would be one thing. If you have just a cloud storage, probably ELT would be a better one for you. If you have a hybrid, then you can do ELT or ETL. Some companies do both depending on like the complexity of like the whatever solution they're trying to solve with the data. Cost is also another thing to consider. Obviously, you might save more money if you're using ELT, whereas doing all the transformation and all the manual stuff might be more expensive. Scalability is also another metric that you should consider to make a decision on if you want to do like ETL, ELT. ELT, you can scale depending on like the resources you're using on the cloud. Whereas for ETL, typically is fixed, right? So there's usually is not too scalable with that. The volume of the data is also another metric. If you have really large data sets, obviously ELT would be a better option as opposed to ETL. Another thing will also be like processing power and just like the compatibility with like the resources that you have.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Well, thanks for giving us that. I know your article tied right into the topic, so I wanted to give you a chance to speak. I do want to change over and talk about, like, once you get the data in the right spot, like it's awesome to have data, but you need to get insights out of it, right? That's the whole goal. So collecting the data and then, in real time, hopefully getting some insights and some information out of that data is super important. So we asked a question: how important are real-time analytics for your organization's operations? And where is your organization in its adoption of real-time analytics? Right? So a plurality of respondents answered that real-time analytics is important, but we can tolerate a small delay. Along with those, more than a fourth of everyone reported that real-time analytics is critical. We need to analyze data as soon as it comes in, meaning that 2/3 of our respondents indicated that the organization needs at least near real-time analytics, right? So keep that in mind. Advances in analytics are continually making real-time more accessible, right? Plugins, APIs, transferring stuff. The infrastructure of resources required is still expensive, though. So sometimes it's a question. Smaller companies, fewer resources, they might prioritize other things. And they may not view real-time analytics as critical because they're handling smaller data volumes, but not necessarily as complex as Barzan and you all said earlier. So the real question is, company size is always a factor, but we want to encourage the community at large, all of you out there, to get creative and find unique, cutting edge, and valuable solutions. So what is your advice to the D-Zone community when it comes to crafting their own path and selecting the right real-time data insights for their business needs? That's the first question. Pedram, you want to lead off there? I see you grinning.
Yeah, I'm laughing because, I mean, we often say real-time analytics is important, but then when I ask people, what decisions are you making in real time? And the answer is nothing. There's going to be, stakeholder meetings and discussions and emails and follow-ups. The decisions aren't being happening in real time most of the time. I think it's important to separate operational real-time needs versus analytical needs. There are operational things that you need to do more quickly. Like maybe someone signs up for your product and you want to notify sales so that they could follow up and send an email, or that is more of an operational requirement. And I think, the faster you do that, the more quickly you get in touch with your lead, the quicker you enrich that data, the better. But that's very separate from like, I need my dashboard updated immediately. Do you need to know exactly how many leads you have to the second? Or are you checking the dashboard once a day, once a week, and you need to aggregate that data anyway? And so if you're doing that aggregation, maybe that one lead that comes in doesn't need to go into the reporting side. So I think thinking carefully about how you separate operational from analytics can help you think better through real-time needs. And then if you can do that, then you can start to set really smart constraints on your data in terms of how quickly it needs to be updated, and update that data, as much as it's going to be acted upon, right? Like that's the real requirement. It shouldn't be like, I want it now because my stakeholders said they want it now, because they will always say they want it more now, faster. It's like, what decisions are they going to make? What actual action will be taken? And then use that to drive latency and cost.
But I want it, Pedram.
Yes. And you can have it at a cost.
Yeah, at a cost.
I will send you the bill.
Awesome. So I noticed a lot of shaking heads and laughing because we've all been there. We've all built an amazing real-time dashboard, and we got it built and we sent it to whatever stakeholders, and we rushed over to their office and said, "Hey, I sent you this dashboard. Wanted to know if you got it." And they're like, "Oh yeah, I got it. Well, did you look at it?" "No, not yet." Right. So clearly they didn't need it in the very, yeah, we've all been there. I get it. Yeah. So really quick, would love to hear from everyone. What would you put, and we'll just go around, right? What would you put at the top of a theoretical real-time data analytics adoption checklist? Like, what would you put at the top? And Joel, we'll start with you at software, and then anybody else who wants to jump in, just rattle some things off. And I'm going to tie it into something for Tuhin here in just a second. Go ahead, Joel.
Do you think you could maybe clarify the question? What kind of things we're looking for?
Yeah. So if you're going to adopt real-time data analytics, what do we have to do? What's the checklist? Before I do this, I need X, Y, and Z.
Sure. Well, I'd say at the very top is of course the question: do we need real-time analytics? It's what's the actual what's the latency of decision making in the organization or for this particular line of business? And some things that are certainly at odds with each other. Where you definitely need real time is with telemetry has been leading and metrics has been leading real time. It's like you can't batch up all of the CPU utilizations of your instances from yesterday. You need to know that right away.
Yep.
But you do need to, but that might be tolerable for how much money did we make yesterday? That would even be potentially fine grained. You don't need to know that right away in all lines of business. So I think that's the first question. From there on, it's not so clear, at least not in my opinion. I think that it really branches in many directions, and I think as engineers, we kind of in our minds know what's going to be the bill for this, both in maintenance and in actual costs. I think something that maybe this is more of a wish list than a checklist for me, but like
okay.
some way of better communicating those costs. We kind of feel the pain of what we're going to go through to get this real-time pipeline working. But maybe if we could better inform and present the actual monetary cost and maintenance and the work involved to our stakeholders, maybe they might be in a better position to actually make that choice.
Okay, Berzon, who's a CEO and also in the academic world, anything that you would add?
So unfortunately, I don't think there's a very good answer there. I'll tell you how it works out actually in practice typically. People have a use case that gets handed down to them from another business unit, from the stakeholders. We say we need real-time analytics, we need this, we need that. Let's say they're using, I don't know, data warehousing X, and then they go and talk to a few different vendors. They decide to go try out data warehouse Y. And if I had a dime for every time I saw a customer spending, 6 to 9 months migrating and doing, like scoping out the project and doing all of this stuff, and then at the end coming back and say, you know what, it didn't actually do what the sales team promised us, and so on. So there's a lot of cost of migration, and there's a lot of surprise bills. Like I've never met a Snowflake customer who had a pretty good idea of how much they're going to be spending on it, because it's so easy to spend a lot more money than you initially thought. And the other way around is true as well. Someone says, hey, this is too expensive, I want to go try out this other solution. They come back and they say, I wish we didn't spend 6 months doing this. So I think the best answer that I could probably offer here is the best advice I would be to try solutions that don't require heavy migration, right? There's a number of interesting solutions where you can just use what you have, build a bunch of smart models on top of it, build a bunch of smart summaries, and just make do with what you've already invested in.
Speaking of smart innovation, Tuhin, I'm going to call on you now. His article was called "The Data Pipeline Movement: A Guide to Real-Time Data Streaming and Future-Proofing Through AI Automation and Vector Databases." So Tuhin's been spending some time thinking about it. What do you think about all this?
Well, going back to the answer of the question that you asked, it of course gives the competitive advantage if we apply the real-time analytics. Say, for instance, the fraud analytics. You have to take the real-time decision that whether a transaction is fraud or not. So there are certain use cases for sure, or kind of real-time personalization of the customer. Customer is there at the store and you want something kind of real-time personalization. So of course, there are very high-value use cases. But I, of course, think with my previous panelists, the core question is that, do you really need it? That's the first and foremost thing. That's the core business question. If your core business question says yes, to run my business, this is sacrosanct, of course, please go ahead. Otherwise, as you rightly mentioned, it will be at the backseat. Nobody, even if the technology provides the requirement solution, but if there is no business need, nobody is going to take a look at it. That is the whole point.
Is there an AI angle there when you were talking about future proofing through AI automation that would help there for when we do have to do it?
So just the example, I can give hundreds of examples, but let me stick to the first one only. Say that fraud analysis decision. So it is happening in a split second. You are transacting or swiping a card, and then that transaction is fraud or not. So it is a real-time decision. It is done by AI and analytics only. And or say, for example, simple thing, you are entering with a biometric systems, entering airport or anywhere, even in your office or your home, smart homes. So that's a kind of real-time decision. So analytics is taking this, matching your IDs, matching your visual structure, and taking a decision. So everywhere it is real-time only. But the most important thing is that, is it your business? That's the first thing. Do you really want it? That's the most important thing. If you want it, then there is a tsunami of solutions, I would say. There is no dearth of solutions for that.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Anybody else? All right, Fred, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to say that when it comes to real time, to AI, to anything, the point is that companies don't need technology. What they need is to solve problems, to increase customer satisfaction, to solve, I don't know, to improve productivity, whatever. So my advice would be to think really, what do you want to achieve? And then when you have answered to this question, you can move to what technology you can use to solve your problem or to answer to your questions.
Cool. All right. So next topic, data observability and visualization. So a topic near and dear to my own heart. I love this. So continually monitoring data pipelines, detecting issues. You know, these are more operational issues, Padram, to yours. We do want to detect those in real time. Observability tools, safeguard data quality, make sure the enterprise apps operate with trusted and timely information, minimize our risks, improve operational efficiency, all good stuff. We wanted to know how developers and their organizations were analyzing and visualizing the data necessary for them to run everything in their app, and what organizations are using to manage observability of the data. So we asked a couple questions. Question number one, which of the following languages does your team currently use to analyze and or visualize data? About half the respondents, well, the second question, which of the following tools does your organization use? About half of the respondents said their team uses 3 or more language. 80% said they use at least 2 languages. Python and SQL were, of course, the most commonly selected, which aligns with last year. And Python was more for data analysis and visualizations than SQL. So when it comes to visualization and observability, what languages are you seeing out there in the field? Joel, I'd love to start with you at the developer level again, if we can. And any thoughts on Python and SQL?
Yeah, I think that SQL has really come a long way in terms of especially translating into these really, really broad-ranging distributed computations. This is something that not so long ago was relegated to MapReduce in a really limited paradigm. And so SQL's gonna just keep getting better and better. It's kind of a fixed target, and but what's going on behind the scenes is getting optimized every day, and it's getting faster and more powerful. I think Python, interestingly, is there are libraries now that are making Python to SQL translations. So SQL is almost like kind of ideal, or like a high-level declarative plan is ideal for what you want to send to these distributed data warehouses, because they can do a lot with that. They can change anything that they want, and you kind of just send your intent. So you're seeing a lot of high-level APIs in Python and SQL emerging here.
Okay, Barry, Srinath, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I agree with the Joe. So most of the analytical tools are used with the SQL as the main language, and Python provides like a kind of the libraries and all those things. It's just you can automate those things by using the SQL and Python.
Okay, Barry, anything you want to add in there?
I agree with both of them. Definitely Python and SQL. I'm seeing more SQL adoption than I am Python, just because I think even people that are not necessarily developers also can use SQL as well to kind of interact with the data.
Good point.
So Python and SQL for sure.
Okay, awesome. All right, we're running out of time. We got one more topic I want to get to: data security. Right, no conversation around this would be complete without talking about security, especially today. 92% of our respondents to our survey believe that at least one of the concerns from 2023 OWASP Data Security Top 10 was a significant potential threat to the software that they build, and 75% selected 3 or more of those threats as significant. Right, the most commonly Selected concerns were insecure data handling and data breaches. Small organizations tended to have fewer security concerns than others, and they were less likely than mid-sized or large organizations to select 8 of the top 10 options. This might help explain, all right, this correlation may help explain the data from other things that we saw in the report that showed larger organizations using more strategies for ensuring data security because they're, of course, concerned about more threats. So how do companies, large, medium, or small, how do they place priority around data security? And what is the right balance for securing your systems? And should it really be based off of your company size? Or is there some kind of middle ground? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, so I think there certainly is an extent to which the size of the company is going to be related to the security considerations. Just fundamentally, a larger surface is going to be more that you need to secure. There's going to be a wider range of ways that people are interacting with the systems, and then over time, we've talked about this and the topic of hybrid systems. But a lot of times you got multiple warehouses, you've got maybe a data lake, and you've got multiple ways of accessing it. The surface area really grows. And I think that there's a lot of interesting work being done in centralizing governance under a decentralized data landscape. I think decentralized data, as we've talked about, has a lot of benefits, but there's especially now there's data catalogs coming out, and for example, Apache Polaris is coming from Snowflake. They've got a lot of contributors there. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to centralize the policies, but decentralize where the data is actually sitting and how it's accessed, so that because fundamentally these systems are as secure as the lowest common denominator. And if you only have one place to secure, then you know where to invest your resources.
Awesome. Anyone else? All right. Well, that is time, team. Thank you so much for each of you joining us today to be an expert on our panel. Thanks to everyone out there for tuning in. And a special thank you to Dagster and Kibo for supporting this discussion. Your support's been pivotal in making this event actually happen. So if you're out there and you enjoyed today and you want to see more content just like this, head on over to dzone.com/events to see all of our on-demand content. Please stay online for just 1 minute and you can give us a brief survey. Tell us how we did. We're always looking to improve. Thanks again for joining, and we'll see you next time.